Acts of courage during the Holocaust. The haunting words of George Santayana reminds us that the lessons of history are invaluable in determining the course of the future. Those who forget the past are condemned to repeat it. The Holocaust was the systematic annihilation of 6 million Jews by the Nazis during World War II. In 1933, 9 million Jews lived in the 21 countries of Europe that would be military occupied by Germany during the war. By 1945, 2 out of every 3 European Jews had been killed. 1.5 million children were murdered. This figure includes more than 1.2 million Jewish children, tens of thousands of gypsy children, and thousands of handicapped children. The Holocaust survivor Abel Herzberg has said, "There were not 6 million Jews murdered, there was one murder 6 million times." The Holocaust is a history of enduring horror and sorrow. It seems as though there is no spark of human concern, no act of humanity to enlighten that dark history. History, despite its retching pain, cannot be unlived, but a faithless courage need not to be lived again. By Maya Angelou. Although the individual acts of courage and humanity enabled beacons of hope to flicker throughout this period of darkness, and ultimately stand as testament to man's ability to confront and withstand extreme evil. During the Holocaust, brave individuals and groups tried to help Jews. Such acts took great courage because the punishments were severe, and in some cases the penalty was death. Those who attempted to rescue Jews and others from the death sentence did so at great risk to their own safety. Anyone found harboring a Jew, for example, was shot or publicly hanged as a warning to others. Sharing scarce resources with those in hiding was an additional sacrifice on the part of the rescuer. Despite the risks, thousands followed the dictates of conscience. In Denmark, 7,220 of its 8,000 Jews were saved by a citizenry who hid them, then feared them to safety of neutral Sweden. Each rescue story is different, yet what rescuers had in common was a combination of awareness, resourcefulness, empathy, vigilance, inventiveness, courage, compassion, and persistence. First, a rescuer had to recognize that a person was endangered, something that was not always clear because of the propaganda and the secrecy of the Nazis. Many rescuers today recount that witnessing one horrifying incident between Nazis and their victims propelled them into becoming rescuers. Next, rescuers had to then decide whether or not to assume the responsibility of helping and risk the potential consequences. Public hangings, deportation to concentration camps, and on-the-spot shootings were very real consequences of helping the enemies of the Third Reich. After the rescuers found ways to help, they took action. Sometimes the entire transformation from bystander to rescuer took just seconds, and in certain cases was not even a conscious decision. People rescued others for various reasons. Some were motivated by a sense of morality. Others had a relationship with a particular person or group. Some were politically driven and were adamantly opposed to the Third Reich. Other rescuers were involved at work as diplomats, nurses, social workers, and doctors, and continued their involvement beyond their professional obligation. Many children followed in their parents' footsteps and became rescuers. The hope of the rescuing activities varied, from leaving food regularly by a ghetto fence to hiding someone within one's house for several years, to create a buoyancy that allowed thousands of Jews to immigrate. Better-known rescuers include Roland Wallenberg, the Swedish diplomat who led the effort that saved 100,000 Hungarian Jews in 1944. Another rescuer, Oskar Schindler, saved over 1,000 Polish Jews from their deaths. Haguna pastor Andrzej Trocmé led the rescue effort in Les Chambres-sur-Lagon, France, which hid and protected 5,000 Jews. Over 13,000 men and women who risked their lives to rescue Jews have been honored as righteous Gentiles at the Yad Vashem Holocaust Memorial in Jerusalem. Thousands more remain unrecognized. The English stockbroker Sir Nicholas Winton was one of the brave and courageous people who helped these people to safety. On holiday in Peru, he recognized the advancing danger and courageously rescued 669 Caucasian children from their doomed fate in the Nazi death camps. But his achievement went unrecognized for over half a century. He kept it secret and never told anyone about what he had achieved. For 50 years, most of the children did not know whom they owed their lives to. Today, there are over 5,000 descendants of the Winton children around the world, including in the UK, Canada, the Czech Republic, and the United States. After the war, wishing involved with the rehabilitation of Europe's refugees, Nicholas Winton worked for international organizations. He retired early and devoted himself to charitable works. Agnes Mandy Achi was in Switzerland in 1939 to study French. She returned to Budapest in 1940. After the Germans occupied Hungary in 1944, Agnes was given refuge in the Swedish embassy. She then began to work for the Swedish diplomat Roland Wallenberg in his efforts to save the Jews of Budapest, including the distribution of protective passes. She was one of the great and courageous people who helped save some. As Allied troops entered Nazi-occupied territories, the final rescue and liberation transpired. Allied troops who stumbled upon the concentration camps were shocked at what they found. Large ditches filled with bodies, rooms of baby shoes, and gas chambers with fingernail marks on the walls, all testified to Nazi brutality. General Eisenhower insisted on photographing and documenting the horror so that the future generations would not ignore the history and repeat its mistakes. He also forced villagers neighboring the death in concentration camps to view what had occurred in their own backyards. Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel once said, "In those times there was darkness everywhere, in heaven and on earth. All the gates of compassion seemed to be closed. The killer killed and the Jews died, and the outside world adapted an attitude either of complicity or of indifference. Only a few had the courage to care." Some other quotes from Elie Wiesel. "There may be times when we are powerless to prevent injustice, but there must never be a time when we fail to protest." Another one is, "What hurts the victim most is not the cruelty of the oppressor, but the silence of a bystander." The men and women who performed these incredible deeds of self-effacing heroism were quite unexceptional in most other ways. They were ordinary people who responded to extraordinary circumstances in a morally exemplary fashion. In a world forever changed by the devastating horror of the Holocaust, their personal stories provide an example for the potential of the human spirit. We all would like to think and say what we would have risked our lives to help them, but honestly, how many of us would? How many of us would have risked our lives and our families just to save some other people? How many of us would have walked away or do nothing about it? I like to think that I would save them without even thinking about it, but honestly, would I? I hope that it never happens again so we never have to figure it out, but it's something to think about.